Usman Rabbani. I'm a partner at Brighton Park Capital. We are proud investors in HTEC and 15 or so other companies. My background is I started as a software developer. I was a computer science major, wrote code for better part of a decade, moved into architecture and service delivery roles in companies very similar to HTEC, and then moved over to the client side in the office of the CIO, procuring software and services. Eventually ended up going to business school, joining Kinsey and Company, helping very large companies make technology decisions, strategy decisions related to technology. And then after McKinsey, joined KKR, which is a large private equity firm, where I worked on the buyout of large technology and enterprise software companies. And for the past 2 years, I've been with Brighton Park Capital, and we invest in, broadly speaking, healthcare IT, enterprise software, and IT and tech-enabled services businesses. So pleased to be here. Thank you.
So my name is Paul Chapman. I'm Vice President of Business Strategy over at Cisco. I'm predominantly focused today on our security and collaboration portfolio. I was previously CIO at a number of different companies before joining Cisco. I was CIO at Box and CIO at HP. I also spent a number of years at companies like VMware during their hyper-growth period, and Sun Microsystems. When you think about it, the world have changed. Two of those companies don't even exist today under their own logo anymore, right? Actually, even HP, when I was there, is separated out since then as well. I lived in Silicon Valley for close to 30 years, but recently relocated to Arizona and loving the desert. Just a little bit of background. I'm a staunch customer advocate, as you can imagine. I bring the outside-in CIO perspective into Cisco, and so therefore I'm always looking for ways to help deliver better outcomes for our customers there. I'm also super passionate about reimagining the way organizations address employee productivity, well-being, the physical workspaces that we work within, and also leveraging AI for good. A big proponent, in fact, we touched a little bit on this in the last conversation that I heard, how especially how AI relates to helping us tackle sustainability, helping with our environment, and so on. And then lastly, I'll say, over the years, what's experience being something you get just after you need it most of the time. I spend a lot of time actually working with a number of startups as an advisor. I sit on a board for a nonprofit, keeping myself super busy and enjoying what I'm doing. I'm happy to be here this morning.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ron Guerrier, rhymes with Perrier for those of you who speak French. I am proud to be here. I'm an advisory board member, just recently joined HTEC. And I'm actually looking forward to my first trip to Serbia and Belgrade coming up soon. In 2 weeks, I'll be visiting. My history arc is somewhat similar to Paul. I've been CIO at several major organizations. So the car conversation was fascinating to me. I worked at Toyota for 19 years, starting as a repo agent and eventually moving to tech, and then running global IT for the financial services arm. After that, I went into insurance. After insurance, I went into healthcare at Express Scripts, which got acquired by Cigna. And then I went into public sector. I got a phone call from Governor Pritzker. I am based here in the great city of Chicago. And Governor Pritzker asked me to serve as CIO and Secretary of Innovation for the state of Illinois, which I did for a couple of years and at the onset of the pandemic. After that, I joined HP as the CIO, global CIO in that role. I'm on a couple of boards, nonprofit boards. I was on a board at Equinix, as you know, is a large data center and infrastructure organization. And currently, I'm a student. I've decided to go back because I always want to refine my craft. And I'm taking a doctorate program at the University of Southern California in leadership and change. And my dissertation, which I'm already kind of thinking through, is on the digital divide, but more importantly, how is AI going to affect societies going forward and the adverse effects if we don't do this right. So again, I'm happy to be here and I appreciate the invite.
Cool, thank you, gentlemen. For myself, I'm Dan Horton, VP of Engineering and Delivery here at HTEC. I've been doing technology and business basically for about 30 years. My journey has taken me from everything from a developer to an architect to a leader, business owner, and content creator. As Sean had said, even playing around doing a podcast. So I am happy to be here and very happy to be talking with all of you gentlemen on some really cool topics. And why don't we get into it? So the first question I have, and for everyone here listening, goes to Usman. And Brighton Park is an investor in HTEC as well as many other organizations. And as we discussed, you get a very unique view. You get a macro view across all the boardrooms. You're able to see a lot of the trends and the issues and a lot of the questions that come up from maybe a different level than a lot of us get to see. So the question I have is, from this unique view, this board level view, what are you seeing? Both public, private companies, different areas, and where do you think leaders should be focused or concerned or even just interested?
Sure. Well, I certainly don't claim to know enough to know where leaders should be focused, but I can tell you what they're talking about. We are, as I mentioned, investors in all sorts of B2B tech companies, growth stage companies, fast-growing companies. And, while every board discussion will have very company, and product-specific discussions, there are some things that come up over and over again in these conversations. And I'll just list a few of them in no particular order. One is that for the past 5 or 7 years, there had been this theme of growth at all costs. Just grow, burn money. It doesn't matter. It's all about growth because that's what the market was rewarding. And that is no longer the case. And now the discussion has shifted to capital efficient growth, increased focus on profitability, unit economics, et cetera. Sort of back to basics. So there's a lot of those discussions and focus. Another theme that comes up is there are many sources of geopolitical uncertainty. Israel, China, not to mention what's going on with China, Taiwan, and TSMC, and the impact on semiconductors and the impact on supply chain, Russia, Ukraine, and then at home here, at least for those of us in the U.S., elections, what's going to happen there, and what will be the regulatory regime that evolves in the U.S., because we're already starting to see a lot of the impact of the FTC changes in leadership and attitude towards business reflected, in how companies operate. So that's another big theme, geopolitical and regulatory uncertainty. The next would be cybersecurity and data privacy. I'm sure, we hear about it all the time, but I feel like there hasn't ever been more of an emphasis on this. Another is talent and workforce development. And this was something I'm sure Ron's going to touch on at some point, understanding the next gen workforce, and what is it that companies need to provide to get productivity and engagement out of workforces. The next one on my list would be technology partnerships. You can't go it alone anymore. There are more and more partnerships that have to be in place for any company to succeed. IT services partners like HTEC, software partners, cloud partners, et cetera. And to manage those partners truly as partners rather than as sort of transactional, I send you an invoice and you send me a product kind of thing. There's a lot of discussion about who are those partners and how are we managing them. And then, of course, the impact of emerging technologies and what happens with Gen AI, which happens to be the emerging technology of the day, but there are a lot of other things that I'm sure we'll go into as well. And then just two more. One would be boardroom diversity, which continues to be a very high priority for all boards. And that's not just about racial or background, ethnicity diversity. It's really about getting the right mix of skills and expertise and perspectives to help the company be successful. Stepping back from all of that, there is a general optimism. M&A activity is picking up, and our companies at least have had some of their strongest quarters ever in the end of 2023. So there's a general feeling of optimism despite all these very important challenges that I listed. So I'll pause there. There's more of a list, but I'm sure we'll touch on some of these as we go through the discussion.
Excellent. Thank you. Gentlemen, do you have anything you want to add on to that?
I'm not sure if we have enough time, to be honest with you. So there is so much there. But every one of us could probably pull one of those threads. And the one I'll just quickly highlight is, I'll just double click on the board diversity one for a second. And Usman, you're spot on. It's not about the color of your skin. It's about many different factors. And the role of a cybersecurity expert on a board is more critical than ever before. And there's a level of liability that's now falling upon the executives. And the question is, where does the board come into play, and how liable are they if there's a breach? And so I've seen that not only as a practitioner, but I've seen it as a CIO. I've seen it as a board member. And the question is, who's on first, who's on second, who's responsible, who's going to hold us accountable? So that one is really, really large. And the other one I'll say broadly is just perspective, giving a board perspective, what markets they should look into, the fact that the racial makeup of the US and the world is changing, which is a beautiful thing, but who's representing those voices is super important as well. So that's the one I just want to double click because I've seen it at all levels throughout my career.
Very good. To your point, there's a lot on here we could talk to, like tech partnerships, diversity, generational adjustments inside of some of those areas, and even the use of AI. So why don't we dive down a little bit further and say, let's take the rise of AI, Gen AI, and everything in between, as that's a big fancy trending topic that we hear pretty much everywhere. And we have organizations that want to use it. We have people who are hoping to use it. And what they're finding is maybe their data is not ready yet. Maybe the organization is not ready yet. Or there's just a lack in skills. It's hard to find them. Or we have concerns around security. And I'm curious to see from you gentlemen, what are you seeing today? What are your thoughts and opinions kind of in these areas? Should organizations be, focusing down maybe? Should we be doubling down on core data before we even play around with AI? Or maybe security is top concern first?
Maybe I'll jump in on that one. I think actually, being in the early stages here, obviously responsible AI and understanding false positives and really getting to trust the data is key. And I think 2024, we're going to see sort of this year of AI readiness, and we're going to start to see obviously accelerated adoption. And I think what will happen is actually, instead of working with these really large language models that have the propensity for more invalid signals coming from it, we're going to see the rise of more specialized AI models, which is really going to distill down into things that are very, very specialized vertically. And then I think we'll see an ecosystem of combining AI models together to create experiences. I mean, I think when I look at it right now, the generative models we have today, or generative tools we have today, generally tend to be jacks of all trades, but experts at none. So I think we'll start to see small language models for specialized use cases. And there's already a number of these that are emerging. I think you're already starting to see, assistants and chief of staff and things like that. So I think that's where we're going to start to see organizations, you have to get to that trust point that you mentioned. And I think lastly on that, and it sort of goes back to what Usman was saying there, and that is when we think about every profession potentially being changed because of AI doesn't discriminate, right? So if if criminals is a profession, then criminals with bad intention can gain the same advantages. So I think that policy and regulation, how governments and how technology companies come together to solve this is going to be really important as well.
Correct. I'll just pull the thread on AI, and it's a fascinating time. And I'll give you an example. I was giving a keynote in Salt Lake City with a bunch of auto executives, Ford, Chrysler, Stellantis, I'm sorry. And it was fascinating. I asked the question, how many of you in this room, these were executives, are making decisions today based off of ChatGPT or whatever tool you're using? You're making business decisions. And I was surprised to see 30% of the room raise their hand. And so then I asked the next question was, okay, so if you're seeing from an auditor in a year or a regulator in 2 years, and you could explain that those decisions, are you comfortable doing so? And they all were like, no. So I said, okay, I think folks are ready to jump the line to get to an answer because they see their competitor doing it, so they have to do it. And Dan did a perfect statement. He's leading the witness a little bit. We do have to go back to the core and the data and really understand it. Because at that point, I asked him, what do you think AI stands for? And it's, well, artificial intelligence, of course. Or it could be automated ignorance, because data in, data out, good garbage, bad garbage. And that really kind of blew me away that decisions are being made already. And I understand why there's a rush to do it, but we really need to go back to the fundamentals and the data. And to go to something that I heard a little bit earlier, the service partners that we partner with, and the partnership is spot on, Usman. You hit it on the head. They cannot be transactional. They have to be part of your ecosystem. You have to hold them accountable. You have to partner with organizations that are very comfortable to tell you, bad idea, customer. That is a horrible idea. Don't go down that path. Here are the reasons why. Are you ready to stand in front of a regulator in 2 years? And my comparison is what we were going through in 2005 to 2015. What happened then? I was running data centers for Toyota, and all of a sudden we started moving it to the cloud. And then the auditor started asking me, well, where's your data sitting? I could not give a clear answer as to where the data was sitting because it was on the cloud. And so the world has shifted, and the accountability of where the information is hosted shifted. And we were not ready for that. Now, today, we can answer those questions. We have an explanation. That is kind of where we're at right now with AI. The fact that AI started in the 1950s with Alan Turing, it's not new. It has just gotten a little bit smarter, and it's now out there. But it's truly automated in ignorance if we don't do this right. So I think it's just fascinating how we kind of see it and how we're kind of running towards it. And some people are actually making decisions, and I think it's too premature. You need to have the right partners to call you and be a sparring partner with you. So quick thoughts on that one. And Paul, you have that look in your face that I want to.
Yeah, I mean, it's a, and I think this is the, this is why we're such in the embryonic stages here, because, we must have reliability in how we address false content, unanticipated outcomes, and we're going to see some things here that are really going to cause us to pause. It's like self-driving cars. I live in an area where I see self-driving cars all the time. I see self-driving taxis. I can actually call a taxi with no driver and get in it today, and it's very weird. How do you get to that level of trust? How did we even get here? And so I think, but as soon as there's a, call it unanticipated outcome, as soon as a driverless vehicle is involved in an accident, it becomes massive news. But what isn't massive news are the thousands and thousands and thousands of, reckless drivers on the roads today that cause accidents. But that one driverless car creates news. And so I think we're sort of going to have a period of time where that happens. And, it's, to Ron's point, I think that, there's always this trust and verify. I'm a big believer in today that, we have to move to the speed of machines and not the speed of humans. And, when you think about real-time streaming architectures and the ability to respond and act real time to data, there's a difference between when you pause and the human takes the action and the machine takes the action. Right now, today, I see a lot of real-time streaming architecture, providing data, providing recommendations, providing feedback, but not necessarily taking the action that the human would then take upon that data. We still have a little of that trust and verify period that's happening. And I think that's going to go on for a while. But as we know, over time, we build the right trust into these models, and we get to the point of where, hey, look, I've received the same result 100 times in a row, and I've pressed the same button 100 times in a row. I'm going to let the machine execute it now. That's where things start to change.
Now, we could spend the whole time here talking about AI, but the only thing I'll add here is that I love this quote by Winston Churchill, which to me sort of summarizes where we are in AI. He said, "Now this is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning." So I think we're at the very foundational stages of everything that's to come, and it will take decades for this stuff to mature.
it'll take a lot of hands-on and learning, as you had said. There's a good point you make in two different parts here. One is speed of machines and not humans, which thus in itself provides the ability maybe to move faster, but at the same time, it's greatly increasing risk. So I think there's a pro and con for both, as we all know. The question I would take is a little off to the side of this, which is we say we're going to put technology in the hands of our workforce, let's say. Mm-hmm. And this is going to allow us maybe to augment the jobs people do today, which goes back kind of, Ron, I think you had said it, right? We have people using AI today, Gen AI services today, maybe in roles they shouldn't be using it. So my question comes back to leveraging that inside of the workforce. Does it make sense? Does it not make sense? Or is it really something where we just should be looking at it as maybe your mentor, a coach, a small, like developers work in pairs. So are we really just creating pairs for the workforce where now we can help people to learn and level up, and we're using it for good, right? Instead of for bad.
So I'll be very brief on this, because again, we could talk about this, and I don't want to be one of those conferences all we talk about is AI, so I won't go that. But the one thing I will say, and this is something that I'm actually studying as a student, and I'm making sure that my kids call me doctor after this is done, is it's very important to realize that we're making a conscious decision as a society to invest more into automation and AI than in some cases education of humans. Let's just swap for that. We're throwing so much more money into AI and all that, which is great, but we're actually divesting our investment into kids in STEM or young adults in STEM. And just pause for a second, think about what that really means. We have more confidence that a machine or a product is going to be more effective if we make those investments in intelligence and that over the humans. So go to what Paul said, which is spot on. It's like, what is the role of AI and what's the role of the human in this kind of equation? And I do believe we have to upskill our staff. We have to continue to invest in our staff just as much as we're investing in AI. And I think that is where the equilibrium is kind of going off. And everyone remembers the movie Terminator and, oh my God, this is going to happen. I think it was 1984. It literally could happen that way if you really think about it, if we don't get ahead of this. And so that's my first statement. The second one is, Dan, you're spot on. At HP, we started really talking about how is AI going to be a concierge or a digital executive assistant to make sure I could code better, I could get this done, or whatever that is. There's truly a fascinating opportunity there. And I think that's where it could come into play. And I think that's where HTEC, to be honest with you, could actually start making people think differently about process engineering and process mapping. And being a Toyota person of 20 years, it's all about process, all about Kaizen. How can I improve and optimize? And I think that's where AI and technology could really kind of enhance. And again, not at the detriment of the human intelligence, but in concert with. And I think that is the challenge we're going to have right now. Because right now we're investing a lot of money in AI, more than we're investing in kids in STEM. And that is concerning. And I saw that as a Secretary of Innovation for the state of Illinois. So I saw that first. And
I might add to that, Ron, that, I think about this is AI is very loose in terms of people throw out AI, but I think about what I refer to as hyper productivity, right? How do we enhance the employee experience? So we're no longer doing these standard, mundane, repeatable types of tasks that we have to do because they go with the territory of the role, right? How are we able to shift to, as Ron said, interacting with computers or software by talking to them and through language versus having to, it would be a lot easier for me to go into Workday and say, or just say, give me my W-2, right? Versus I got to go in, I got to log in, I got to go to VPN, I got to click, I got to point, I got to move my mouse, I got to go draw that out, I got to download it, all that stuff, right? How do I eliminate those steps in the process? And that's why I think we'll see a significant increase in these AI-powered assistants. I've already started to see it in a number of organizations now that I'm quite familiar with, where they're really bringing in assistants, say as an example, GTM or go-to-market assistants or sales assistants that are like a chief of staff for you in that space, where you'll go out and get intelligence automatically for dissecting earnings or analyzing key accounts or deals, stuff that you could do yourself, but would take time. So instead of spending 3 hours doing that, you're spending 30 seconds doing that, which allows you to move to higher value activities. We're seeing it in developer activity. Assistants are speeding up, tasks such as documentation. Now, the documentation may not be 100% correct out of the gate, but it might be 80 or 90% of the way there. And then you focus your time on just finalizing that last 10%. And to me, this is where we're starting to really see this hyper productivity come into play.
Usman, I see you jumped in. Did you have something you wanted to add to?
No, I mean, I agree with all that. I think what my core belief on this is that human plus AI is the way forward. People talk about, hey, will AI replace lawyers? Will AI replace doctors? Will AI replace X? No, but lawyers that use AI will replace lawyers that don't. In the same way that financial analysts that did not use Microsoft Excel were replaced by financial analysts that did use Microsoft Excel. And this kind of transformation, in labor and workforces will continue to happen. And I think AI will follow a similar path.
Yeah, I agree with all you guys on that, to the point that it's allowing, kind of as Paul said, is people to have mental bandwidth, to have energy, to start thinking about working on things that are creative, about innovation and things like that, and stop getting away from fighting with tool sets and environments you're trying to work with, and like all these little things that take away our energy. So by the time we have time to think about something, we're not so tired we can't think about those things. But to get us out of AI, because that was one of the things we said, I agree. One of the other key factors or key themes that comes up a lot is we have global workforces, we have remote workforces, right? COVID overall moved everyone home, and we got used to working from home. Everybody works in a dress shirt and pajamas now. Like we're moved away. But in this, now you have organizations trying to figure out whether is my workforce working, to how do I get them back into the office, and sometimes taking extreme measures to do that. So I'm curious on this theme. What are you seeing? What are you feeling? This is a very real thing today of trying to, again, right, use our real estate, get people back in the office, or make them extremely effective remote.
Well, maybe I jump in on that one. I spend a lot of time in thinking about this in regards to the future of work and or even the now of work, and how do we think about reimagining work and reimagining workspaces. So if employees do come into the office, at Cisco we like to say the office should be a magnet, not a mandate, right? But how do we re-earn the commute? One of the things that remote workers are afforded today, or distributed workers are afforded today, is the give back of time, right? It's the most precious thing you could ever give anybody, is the give back of time. And if I don't have to jump in my car and commute for an hour and a half every day, or whatever that is, that's a significant give back of time. And what we're finding, Dan, is that it's not employees don't want to go back into an office space. They're actually, we want to, as human beings. We actually like to get together. We like to have social interaction. We like to build social capital. We like to. Can you imagine being young in career and trying to build your career when you're on digital quarantine? You need to have visibility. You need to be able to join the dots. You need to have those in between moments. So there's a thirst for coming into an office space, but it's not the thirst to come in and sit and do work. So the offices are, I mentioned workplace or workspace earlier. You have to really think about and be intentional about redesigning space so that it's built for collaboration, it's built for ideation, it's built place where people want to go and do their best work. And I think that's part of this, and also this forcing of coming back into the office. I think we're seeing now. I think the study I just saw recently showed that jobs that offer hybrid and remote work are getting 7 times more applicants than those that are saying you must come into the office every day. I think that there's a tug of war that's going on there. It's creating a bit of a dichotomy. But the companies that are allowing flexibility and building space that's attractive for employees to come in are finding employees are being super productive and are much more likely to be attracted to that company. We talk about the great resignation that happened. How do we become the great attraction? How do we become the organization where people want to come and do their best work and attract the best talent?
That's a perfect call out. We saw that in different forms and fashions over the year, right? You had organizations that gave away coffee and food. I've worked for some of them myself. And then you have special workspaces, or as you and I, all of us have talked earlier, even the fact of, if I have a team that's working on a specific project, can I create an area, a war room, a work room for them where they have a community? So they come in once a week and they hang some stuff on the walls. They start creating the narrative of the stuff they're working on. They have the water cooler effect. So now they can talk. They actually get to know each other. It creates a unique experience, and an experience that maybe some younger generations have lost. They've never had the experience. They've started their jobs since COVID, and they don't even know what it's like to come into an office and have those experiences.
If I can just add one more thing, because you mentioned about the coffee and the lunches. They don't work. I mean, that is not the give back of time. The giving of food and the giving of dry cleaning and all these, Google, Facebook, Apple are all struggling with this exact problem because they've spent billions of dollars on incredible campuses that are very attractive to go and work at. But unless you're giving back, unless you're able to replace, it's time, it's the value of time. It's like, what can't a billionaire buy? 1 second of time, right? And if you're going to take away 15 hours of time a week for me to come into the office, it's not going to be for food or coffee. It's going to be, for your exact point, Dan. It's to be able to join my work colleagues in war rooms and build that camaraderie and have that build that social capital. But it's not going to be to come in and sit at a desk. That's where the throw is. Some people are early birds. Some people are night owls. Flexibility in how I work as an individual is where the resistance is coming from. So how do you create an environment that allows people to work the way they want to work?
So I will throw in a +1 or 2. I'm talking on a headset right now because my dog Mojito, and that is my dog's name, was barking earlier because someone's working on the roof. And hopefully you guys didn't hear it because I had the right technology from home. And I bring this up is one of the challenges of getting people back to work is in the 2 years we're out of the office. The offices have become this dystopian road warrior world where you go into a conference room, there's 1,000 plugs, you don't know how to connect. And that experience is far better at home than it is in the office. So until we actually make an experience in the office where they can connect like they can at home, the technology is just as great because we have lost that, right? And the other part of that is when people are in the office and people are working from home, I noticed this a couple times, you got to understand how do you bring the people now online into the conversation that you can't notice body language and conversation. And it's kind of like a walkie-talkie. And those of you who are a little younger, walkie-talkies are little things, you hit a button and it was kind of binary. You had to really pause and think, how are you communicating with those in the room versus those on the screen? And you have to give each other time. There's a psychology of change that's happening with that. So to go to what everyone's saying, +1, is that we do have to provide the technology in the office just as great as it is at home. So when you are in the office, you can work in a collaborative manner for those who are there or those who are remotely. HP, again, not a plug for HP, I'm not there anymore, but I can say that one of the reasons the purchase of different Poly and other companies is that peripheral experience with the device was super important. How could you have that? So I do want to add a +1 on everything that Paul said and Dan said, but I think the technology, as technologists, think about the technology, how could that help in this kind of new construct? Because again, the other thing I noticed is I don't have to commute anymore. That's great. But now I'm on a call until 9 p.m., 10 p.m., in some places too, because I have to talk to Singapore. So I'm actually putting more hours, but I feel like my hours are a little bit more valuable than me sitting in the traffic in Houston, Palo Alto, or here in Chicago.
Yeah, actually, it's very interesting you should say that, Ron, because something, Dan, I know we said we're moving away from AI, but actually audio intelligence and video intelligence is actually playing a big part now in understanding the science behind interaction, to Ron's point. How do we create more engaging, immersive experiences? I mentioned earlier about having a passion for thinking about well-being and health in the workplace. And to Ron's point, being on calls all day back to back and late at night is not good for our well-being or over time our mental health. And that's a science. That's not just making that up, right? Why do we feel fatigued at the end of the day? Why do we feel exhausted? And if this is happening over extended periods of time, that can lead to health challenges. And I'll give you one simple example. Most people, when they're on a video call or on a phone call, will elevate their voice by about 15%. So just because we just human beings don't naturally believe the person on the other side can hear us at the same level as if we're sat next to them. Plus, we also have to struggle more to see facial expressions and body language and feel more engaged. Pre-pandemic, when I was CIO, we used to, it was the second-class experience for the remote participants. Well, today we know in this distributed world, we're always in conference rooms where there's remote participants, whether they're in conference room to conference room, corporate, or they're in home offices or wherever they might be. To Ron's point, how do we think about that experience? How do we automatically adjust? Here's what happens when someone elevates their voice by about 15% on average. Some people it's more. It actually takes more energy to actually share what you're sharing, and it creates more cognitive stress or more cognitive load. It creates cognitive load on the recipient, that's for sure. It feels like someone's shouting at you or raising their voice at you. It becomes, and if you think about back-to-back calls like that, cumulative stress, cumulative cognitive load is what creates exhaustion. We have to be thinking about that. And that's why, to Ron's point, a lot of companies like HP and Cisco are doing the same. They're investing heavily in the devices and the peripherals, not just a camera and a microphone, but also in audio technology. As an example, using NVIDIA chipsets to do AI at the edge, to automatically adjust cameras, to automatically adjust voice levels. There's a lot of intelligence that's going into that now. So I think no matter how much we try to get away from AI in this conversation, it's going to put us back in.
Yeah, I think just to give you an evidence point, I mean, what's working in our companies are binary models, meaning all remote or all in person. The hybrid stuff, not working too well for all the reasons that Ron and Paul mentioned. I don't think we've figured this out yet. But I know what I'm telling my kids. My kids are college age kids, and they're considering professional job opportunities. I'm telling them, go where there's a workplace. Go where there's a workplace. Do not sign up for remote work. That's what I'm telling my children.
The only challenge I have,
recommendation.
Just real quick, the only one challenge I have is we have to make sure we mind the gap. We have to think about, if we're going to create an inclusive future for all, we have to think about people that do have maybe disabilities or are disadvantaged that can't come into an office every day. And I just want to make sure we don't miss that gap, because it's easy to do, right? We have people that, and this is where AI is helping as well. People that may be colorblind, or they may not all be speaking the same first language, or maybe hard of hearing, or have certain disabilities that prevent them from commuting, but allow them to be able to do the job equally as anybody else. And so I think we have to just make sure that when we're conscientiously thinking about an inclusive future and minding the gap on those types of people.
I think, Paul, that's where the ways of working as an organization or as teams is really important too, because as Usman just said, is I found if the technology still isn't here for it, right? If we're mixed, we're half are in the office and half are in a room and the other half are on video, it's still hard to hear. You still don't feel included. And technology is a good outcome from COVID is pushing this kind of technology forward. So that gets better and better in leaps and bounds, which is great. But I found that putting practices in place that allow, if one person's on video, everybody's on video, even if you're in the same location, just to try to make sure that they felt they were included. So I think it's a really great call out, that it's making sure people, if they have to be remote, still feel included, still feel like they're part of the meeting, part of the room. Like there's no, it's creating that sense of community in what we're doing.
Yeah, we have a notion, we call it distance zero. How does it feel like everybody is at the same distance apart, no matter whether they are, whether they're in the same room or whether they're halfway around the world? How do we create a distance zero experience? And to Ron's earlier point, cameras and audio and AI are allowing us to move in that direction. And we've already seen great advancements. And I think we're not there yet, of course, but we are there. These are principles that are now built into the innovation that's going into collaboration, and we're going to see that, I think, continue to get better and better and better to the point of where hopefully we will. In fact, VR is actually a big part of what's happening now, right? The ability to put on goggles and actually feel like you're, you may be virtual, but you feel like you're physically in the same space and you're sitting across the table from each other. That's already happening.
And one quick statement on Usman's statement and advice to the kids. My son just graduated with applied mathematics. So he's like, oh God, I can do algorithms. I have a job future. My daughter is about to graduate in May with a law degree from Northwestern, and she is freaking out a little bit because AI is going to disrupt the legal profession. She's like, what did I just spend 3 years on? So it is absolutely fascinating that my son is like, yes. And my daughter's like, oh, great, Dad. Thanks. Law was not really probably the way to go. I was like, they'll be fine. They'll be fine. But I think the one thing to add to generationally, communication is super important. How we communicate with each other is super important. The world of abbreviated conversations doesn't work. My son, BRB, be right back. Like everything is an acronym. And so when we are with each other, communication is super important. And all generations have to be good storytellers. And if we could pivot to that, or just, Dan, one quick thing, is that when I partner with a company like an HTEC or the competitors of HTEC, TCS, Infosys, whoever that is, I really gravitate to organizations that are good storytellers. They understand my problem statement and they can give me a vision of where do we need to go. I think that is so important. And I sat in meetings where some folks go, this is what it is, that's what it's going to be, pay me the money. And it's like, no, that doesn't work for me as a CIO. What I need from you is a story. I need a vision of where you want to take us and where you're going to add value to that vision. And that is so important. And that's where I struggle a little bit with how folks might communicate these days. It has changed dramatically. And with COVID and working from home, the social interaction that Paul and Usman just talked about has eroded that even more. So anyway, I just want to say that is something that's concerning me as kind of where we're going with this when it comes to our interactions. Human interaction has changed dramatically.
I think that's a really good call out too. People like narratives. We all like stories. We watch movies and we read books because we like narratives and stories. That is in business as well. The idea that we need to take something that might be highly technical and very complex and still figure out how to put it into a narrative that brings everyone along, that can explain why we're doing something and what the outcome's going to be. What's the journey and what's the end result? I think we have a lot of questions. So why don't we jump over to a couple questions? And I think, Sean, you're going to help us out with that.
Yeah, I can help you out with that. So thank you all. And, you make a good point that AI is the topic of the day, and it's impossible to avoid it, as much as we might even like to sometimes. And in fact, our next session is all about AI. So we're literally going to spend an hour just talking about AI. But thank you. This was an enlightening conversation. Usman, I appreciate your advice to your kids. I work 100% remote now. I was going into the office at least once or twice a week in my prior role. And I have to admit, I have to be very, very intentional now about making sure I get out of the house and go see people and friends and other professionals, et cetera, because it's real easy to stay home every day, all week, every week. So I appreciate that advice. One of the questions that came in is an interesting one, and especially on the heels of NVIDIA's revenue announcement, which was quite remarkable. If NVIDIA was the winner of the last couple of years building an AI infrastructure, et cetera, who do you see, what companies can you imagine, or even types of companies will win in the next couple of years? Like the next, you mentioned that we're not at the beginning, maybe we're at the end of the beginning. So you were sort of looking at this next wave of commercialization of AI technology, et cetera.
I typed an answer to this, but I'll actually give an example. And my answer to that is, just like, infrastructure and applications and software have layers in the stack. If NVIDIA is at the sort of foundational layer, the question to ask is, what's the next layer in that stack? And I think that the next layer in that stack is something that I think Paul and Ron both have alluded to, which is the domain-specific models. Domain-specific models that are aware of context, that are aware of content, that are aware of regulatory constraints, et cetera, for example, in healthcare. And we're sort of putting our money where our mouth is on that by investing in companies like Exelis. So Exelis, if you look them up, they're a company that sit on top of EMR data. So EMRs are electronic medical records, and every hospital there is one. And they're like giant dumb databases generally. And so Exelis is a company that sits on top of that EMR and sucks up all your medical and clinical and appointment data, et cetera. And then, makes predictions like, hey, given this patient and these conditions and this background and this history, how likely is the patient to be hospitalized on this visit? Or how, should we hospitalize this patient on this visit? Yes or no? Or should we just give him some medicine and send him home? That is actually a huge, huge decision that can have not only economic consequences in terms of, reimbursement, et cetera, but obviously huge health implications for that patient. So I think you're going to see the emergence of more and more tools that are sort of this AI application domain aware layer that sit on top of the what we have today, which is brute force.
Anyone else? Any thoughts?
I would yes, and yes, what Usman just said. There's a sea of information out there, even with all the AI that's joining the market, and who's going to be able to render it and make it useful and value add. Honestly, AI VARs, or whatever we want to start labeling it, that ability to take it and distill into something that's tangible and useful, but also mindful of the PII and the HIPAA and all the stuff that Usman spoke of. Because the next thing you don't want is that you start using it, as I mentioned earlier, and all of a sudden a regulator comes after you because you didn't use it intelligently. Then all of a sudden everyone won't want to touch it. So it has to be done with intelligence, but I truly believe it's those value-added organizations that are going to really be the next opportunity.
The next question, and this was just kind of alluded to actually by you, Ron. How do you think the growing gap between individuals who are proficient in using AI and those who are not will be addressed? Do you think that the pressure on individuals is increasing due to necessity to keep up with AI?
The answer is there's a lot of people that I'm aware of that are not in the tech industry that are, lack of a professional word I can think of right now, freaking out. At the University of Illinois, where I attended, see behind me, if you're in accounting or finance, you're required to take Intro to Python. You can't graduate with a bachelor's degree in accounting for U of I if you don't have some kind of technical proficiency. When I graduated back in 1996, that was a while ago, Intro to CS 105 was the class. We had to do an ATM program, and that was it. That's all we needed. So I truly believe that everyone is worried about the disruption, including, as I said, my daughter a second ago. So what I think we need to do, I think everyone needs to acknowledge that there is a gap, and we have to work with our local schools, agencies. We need to self-learn. We need to upskill as to what this is and understand it better. And I'm not saying everyone needs to be a coder, everyone needs to be a programmer. I know Usman, you said you used to do it back in the day. I lost that skill many, many moons ago. But again, the awareness. And the other thing I'll broadly say is STEAM education is super important. I've made trips to Asia, and I've seen in Chinese classrooms that intro to AI or the intro to algorithm writing was a first grade-ish level. We don't talk about that stuff in the States and probably in some European countries until later in their academic progression. We really have to push that earlier in the process and get a lot more women and underserved communities in that as well. So I think there's a gap, and I think there's a moment where we just need to wake up and address it, or it's going to get out of our hands. And I say that as a public appointed official here in the state of Illinois at one point, where I was trying to get organizations to understand that. But again, we're in a divisive world. Hopefully people will start listening. But sure. It is a concern.
Yeah. Dan, Paul?
I think, this is one of those things where we interact with AI and we don't know we're interacting with AI. And I think, again, AI is very loose when you think about just AI by itself. I mean, as an example, we just talked about audio and video intelligence and how AI automatically switches camera angles on us, automatically does things with background noise removal, like Ron was talking about, and other things that it does automatically for us. And so, but that's all under AI. I mean, we talk a lot about large language models, but there's also this emergence now of what we call RMM, which is rich media models, I think is what it stands for, where it is now looking at human interactions and actually interpreting what, it's not what you said. We can all do transcriptions and translations, but it's how you said it. Paul said this, but was he really happy? Was he unhappy? You know, what was the tone? What was the, you know, there's a lot of things that we're going to do that are just naturally going to be interacting with AI processing that's going to happen. And then there's the things that we are purposeful about. You know, back to the earlier point of starting to see more of an AI ecosystem. If you remember, when we first started in the SaaS world, there was this massive emergence of microservices. You know, you had the Twilios, you had mapping, you had payment engines, and as developers, you could bring together and curate experiences by very quickly assembling. You go out, you get your infrastructure from Amazon, your payments from messaging from Twilio, your payments from Stripe, whatever it might be, and then you can create these experiences. And I think that's where we're going to really need to see experience or knowledge or training, is how do I start to bring these AI models together to create, you know, experiences, whether that's an application or whatever it might be. But I think actually training, I mean, anybody can go out and use ChatGPT. That's what I recommend. Just go out and interact with it. Just go use it. There's plenty of self-training you can do. Then it's not, and because it's more natural language, it's a lot easier than learning Python or Java or C# or whatever. It just is.
Yeah. Some of that comes back to, like we said, teaching young people how to use it. Everyone's using it for something today, especially the younger generations, and it's using it correctly and not just blindly trusting what it gives you. You know, forgetting that you should do your own research and your own reading and your own learning, and it's a mix of the two. So again, it's more of an assistant helping you to do something better and faster. It's not so much replacing something you were doing today, because then that knowledge gets lost. The ability to understand how to think for yourself gets lost. Like, there's a lot of things that there's negative things that can happen as well as positive. So it's teaching people early how to use this tool to the best of its ability, right, to help them do better going forward. Because I do think in the future, we're going to see almost every job requires some form of a skill set of using, whether it's ChatGPT or it's AI or some basic programming languages to move forward. So you'll be in an interview somewhere where your ability to use that tool will be the differentiator between you or someone else getting hired for a role.
That brings up the final question, I think, which is, and Usman, thank you for responding in here. And if you want to elaborate on your point that you made, that'd be great. But it's, do you foresee a sustained increase in job opportunities or salaries within the industry, or do you anticipate fluctuations in the near future? And Usman, I think you articulated very nicely there that in the short term, there'll be disruption, confusion, wage depression in some of those roles for sure. But over time, it becomes a skill that's required. And you'll start to see it in more and more job descriptions, just like any other technology or emerging technology, just like we would ask for someone to have a background in cloud infrastructure today. Yep. You'll start to ask for people to have a background in AI tools and technologies. And so
we did asking for Excel in the past.
Yeah, I think you know, we have to be honest with ourselves. There absolutely will be pain and suffering, as is with any technological disruption, whether it was, you know, steam engines or, you know, tractors or anything else. And I think that's just the reality of technological disruption. I think that you know, you certainly, you know, there are certain targeted things that even today we know, you know, they're in trouble. Like, you don't want to be a logo designer anymore. Like, that's probably not a good. You better be doing many other things besides designing logos, and a number of other things we can think of. But I think generally I'm optimistic that, you know, in almost every role, AI plus human is probably going to be the evolution of that role.
So if I could, just one final thought on this. So I raised my kids not on Harry Potter or Twilight. I raised them on Fast and Furious, because I'm a car guy. And I see quantum computing as the NAS that's going to hit us. It's the accelerator in the near future, I think once that really becomes what it's intended to do, encryption goes away within 15 seconds. I mean, the opportunities of what that will do to accelerate everything we're talking about is just magnified. And I know here in the state of Illinois, there's a lot of investment to make this the quantum computing hub in the States. And so with that being said, I think everything we said is great, but I am wondering what that's going to do for this next week. Is that the NAS that's going to take us to that next level? So anyway, there's probably a whole different discussion on quantum computing, but that is like, what is this? It's coming, and let's be prepared for what we don't know about it. It's here.
Yeah, you know, it's the analogy of the slowest rate of change we'll ever experience is the one we're experiencing now. Yep. And it's not going to slow down anytime soon. And so we have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? And anytime there's this new wave, it's the uncertainty and doubt that gets created by this change that's happening, right? And we've gone through it before. You know, I don't know, I'll age myself as well. When I was in school, I was a COBOL and RPG programmer. That was my first job, right? I've had to reinvent myself personally many times over, right? What I was, you know, I was a C programmer, I was a Java programmer. I did a whole bunch of different things, but you have to, you know, and if you choose technology, especially as a career path, you have to learn to reinvent yourself, and you have to recognize that change is mandatory, right? It's the suffering that isn't, as they say, and if you don't like change, you'll like irrelevance even less, right? You're not going to have a successful career if you don't get comfortable being uncomfortable and moving forward with, you know, these waves of change. I'll tell you one thing that I think is just personal experience. You know, like Ron, I ran organizations where I had literally thousands of people in my organization globally. I'm an individual contributor now. And one thing I can clearly say is that the amount of time that is spent on doing things that you're not necessarily measured on, right? Like proving an expense report, proving a travel request, writing performance reviews, managing an organization, all these things to consume a significant amount of your time. And the freedom of not having to do those things, you know, they were part of your responsibility, and the give back of that time to go focus on things that bring, you know, get you closer to revenue, get you closer to customers, that bring more value to the organization is a massive benefit. And so as AI is able to take care of more and more and more of the things that, if I could just say, you know, I'll make it up. Hey Siri, I'll call it Siri for no other better term. Hey Siri, approve Ron's expense report, and it's done. And I don't have to go, you know what, it's 8 o'clock. Oh shit, Siri just turned on. It didn't approve your expense report, Ron. But you know, things like that, I think, are going to be massively beneficial. And so I don't think we should be resisting this type of change that's going to come into the workplace.